Hello, welcome to the Daily Politics. With a hung parliament on the cards, there's growing speculation about who will work with whom after the general election. Could it be Labour and the SNP, the Tories and UKIP? We'll be looking at all the options. Tory party chairman Grant Shapps says he screwed up over denials he had a second job. Labour says that's not good enough and is calling for an inquiry. Nicola Sturgeon tries to strike an upbeat note as she visits London. She claims the SNP will help, not harm the rest of the UK after the election. And we're getting used to hearing things like vote Labour, get the SNP. We'll be asking if voters are getting the message or if they're just left feeling a little confused.
They're using that as a threat against voters to say that if you don't vote conclusively for one side, you're not going to get anything, you're going to get a mix.
With us for the whole of the programme today, 4 people who want to become MPs. God help them at the general election and join what could be another hung parliament. So feel free to use the next hour, you 4, as practice for when you might all have to work together in 52 days' time. For the Conservatives, it's Nus Ghani. For Labour, Sarah Sackman. The Green candidate, Darren Hall. And a woman you might recognise as a former Lib Dem MP. Now standing again, Julia Goldsworthy. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
First of all today, let's talk about the Conservative Party chairman, Grant Shapps. This morning he's had to admit that he screwed up in a recent interview when he insisted he'd never had a second job since he became an MP in 2005. He made the admission after a recording was published by The Guardian, showing that in 2006 he was still making sales pitches for his online marketing firm, something he did under the pseudonym Michael Green. So Mr Shapps says he made a mistake, but Labour wants an inquiry into whether his outside interests, which were fully declared at the time, breached the rules. Well, with more on this story, let's go to our correspondent Alex Forsyth. Alex, take us through this.
Joe, this isn't a row directly about the work that Grant Shapps did or didn't do. He's been very open about the fact he ran this web marketing company. He's been very open about the fact he used a different name, Michael Green, when conducting his business interests. So it's not about that. And even if he'd done that while he was an MP, that would still be within the rules. The problem for Grant Shapps is that he denied he did that work while he was an MP. He's been very clear and unequivocal about that. In fact, just a few weeks ago, he spoke to LBC Radio and he told them he did not have a second job while he was an MP. Let's have a little listen to what he said.
You know that having 2 working lives, in a sense, an MP or a candidate in an election and private businesses, it can come across as very tricky, and it did for you when you operated under a different name.
No, well, just to be clear, that was before I was an MP, so not really.
I think the difficulty that people have when they see what they saw with Sir Malcolm Rifkind and Jack Straw, and possibly even your decision to separate your business and political life by using a different name, a pen name.
Before going into politics?
Yes, yeah, I understand, but still, you were still active enough in politics to need to separate the politics from the business.
So to be absolutely clear, I don't have a second job and have never had a second job whilst being an MP.
Now, clearly that's not quite the end of the story, because the Guardian newspaper have found a recording that was made in 2006 in which Grant Shapps seems to be making a sales pitch for his company. Now, 2006 was a full year after he was elected as an MP here in 2005, and the Guardian say this quite clearly shows he still did have a second job. Let's have a listen to what Mr Shapps said back in 2006.
If people are listening to this pretty currently, and we're in the summer of 2006 whilst we're recording, then a great timescale would be to use the profit diary techniques to make a ton of cash by Christmas. And then the third product is called SR3, and those who remember the Stinking Rich range from number 1 and 2 will know that SR3 is Stinking Rich 3.
Now, Labour says this goes right to the heart of the issues about integrity and trust in politics. It's not about whether he actually did have a second job, because that's within the rules. It's about the fact that he denied it. The Conservatives have sought to play this down, saying he made those comments in the cut and thrust of an interview. It relates to something that happened a really long time ago, and it's thought, in fact, that Mr Shapps himself didn't really view this as a second job. He thought of this as more of a hobby. His company was winding down at the time. But he is, of course, the Conservative Party chairman. We are within spitting distance of the election, and these aren't the kind of headlines that he would want.
Alex, how much trouble is he in?
It depends whether you view this as a minor mistake or a major breach of trust. Undoubtedly, it's embarrassing for Grant Shapps to have to admit that he's screwed up. And undoubtedly, this plays into the feeling among some parts of the public that, in fact, you can't trust what politicians say. But the Prime Minister, through his spokesman, has said he has full confidence in Mr Shapps. Sometimes these rows really gather traction. I think it's quite difficult to call yet whether or not this one will. So when it comes to that long-term damage, I think that's still hanging in the balance.
Alex Forsyth, thank you. I mean, Nus, this is presumably the last thing you need on the doorstep when you're campaigning just weeks from the general election.
I mean, I've heard the story with everybody else this morning, and I don't have any further information, but what I can glean and what I've heard just now is that everything was declared, everything has been open and transparent, and as long as the rules are followed, that's what is important. As your bit of VT noted, it is a very short period of time before the election. I personally don't know whether this is just a distraction from what's really important, which is the election campaign that we've got to work really hard on for the next 50 odd days.
But you don't need a distraction, do you, at this point in term? And if it does continue over the next few days, it's going to be more difficult for you to answer those questions on the doorstep.
I'm not sure whether it's just a Westminster bubble story, to be frank. The conversations I have with people on the doorstep have nothing to do with Westminster. It's about their jobs and their children getting apprenticeships, you know, being able to secure mortgages. It's very rare that whatever happens in Westminster in the news cycle comes up on the doorstep.
What about the issue of trust and integrity? Does that come up on the doorstep?
I think there is a huge issue about people not coming out to vote as much and people not feeling that any political party necessarily represents their views, which is why it's so important for us as candidates that we're out knocking on doors, because that's what's going to help us secure our seats, is having that one-to-one conversation with the residents in the communities that we wish to serve. Right,
but the problem is if you have one of your colleagues in a very senior position, in some sort of embarrassing, to say the least, embarrassing episode in which his trust is being questioned and his integrity, because it's actually about his denials of having a second job. How do you deal with that?
Well, that was something that happened 10 years ago. He's been absolutely transparent, open and honest and followed the rules. I think what's really important is that when we see parliamentarians or even local government public servants, that they all have experiences and careers outside of politics. Otherwise, we're going to end up with politicians who've just come through politics all of their lives, and nobody wants that either.
Right. Now it's time for something a little different, and that is our daily quiz. And the question for today is, what event has got the Green Party into trouble with its activists? Was it A, a support rally for Jeremy Clarkson, B, a powerboat race, C, the launch of I Love Fracking t-shirt, or D, a green tie fundraising event? At the end of the show, the panel will give us the correct answer. I'm sure Darren will anyway. Now, unless one of the biggest parties pulls away in the next month or so, the polls suggest that no single party will win a majority at the general election. That would mean another hung parliament, with either Labour or the Conservatives needing to form a coalition of two or even more parties if they are to form a majority government. It's little wonder, then, that thoughts are turning to what the likely alliances might be. But it also seems to be the last thing that some politicians want to talk about. UKIP leader Nigel Farage has ruled out a formal coalition with the Conservatives, but said he would back them on key votes in return for a referendum on Britain's membership of the EU by the end of 2015. Yesterday, Chancellor George Osborne told the BBC that was just total nonsense, but he wouldn't rule out any deal with UKIP. The Scottish National Party seem keener to talk about their role after the election. They've repeatedly said they could support Labour on a vote-by-vote basis. But Shadow Chancellor Ed Balls said talk about Labour making a deal with the Scottish National Party was also nonsense, and insisted the party is fighting for a majority. The SNP have also talked about joining forces with the Greens and Plaid Cymru to form an anti-austerity alliance. Meanwhile, the Lib Dems have said they'll work with the party with the largest number of seats. And the fourth largest party in Parliament, the DUP, hinted they could work with Labour when they set out their red lines for coalition talks. Well, we had hoped to be joined by UKIP to discuss their role after the election, but were told that none was available. Nuz, let's start with you again. Yes. Nigel Farage says he would do a deal with the Conservatives in return for certain criteria on a referendum. Would you accept such a deal?
I think Farage is being a little self-indulgent and attention-seeking. I think, you know, if people are concerned about Europe, the only party that's committed to giving us all a say, not just Farage and UKIP, but all of us have a say, is by voting Conservative. We are committed to offering a referendum by 2017 once we've renegotiated terms. I'm working really hard in Wilden and supporting the seats that we need to win, Eastbourne and Lewis, for an outright Conservative majority.
So would you rule out, in your mind, any sort of deal with UKIP?
Let's do the maths here. UKIP have 2 seats. They're going to struggle to keep those 2 seats. They're not really going to be, people that are going to make or break a deal with the potential of having 2 seats in Westminster.
But the other part of the maths is that neither the Tories nor Labour are likely to, never mind, get an overall majority, but even they're going to struggle to be the largest party between the two of them. So the maths there is you will need other parties. So I say again, would you do a deal with UKIP?
I think the polls are going in our favour. When I am canvassing in my seat, or even
Really?
our marginal seats, it's interesting how
well,
people
the poll of polls puts Labour slightly ahead, and that's the one that counts, isn't it?
They are snapshots, but when I am out canvassing in my seat or even our marginal seats, more and more people are feeling the positivity coming out of the economy, more money back in their pockets, and that's what I'm focused on. I'm focused on making sure people understand what we have delivered and what we hope to achieve in the next term of office.
What do you say on the doorstep if someone says, actually, quite like the idea of an early referendum, would you talk to UKIP?
No one's ever said that.
Right, and if they did?
If people say that they want a referendum and they know that we are committed and they know that if we have a majority, we would renegotiate terms and everybody has an opportunity to have a say.
So no deal with UKIP as far as you're concerned?
I'm here for a Conservative majority government.
Yeah, all right. Darren, why don't you offer something similar to Ed Miliband? As Nigel Farage has said, we'll give you our seats, our votes, if you give us an early referendum on Europe. Why don't you do something similar with a red line for the Greens and Labour?
We're not talking about red lines at this stage. I mean, the whole reason I came into politics was actually to talk about the policies rather than the parties. And I've been very clear, especially as we don't have a whip system, that gives us an opportunity to be a real constituency MP and come in and talk about the issues. So at this stage, we are willing to have conversations, but certainly not about red lines. And it's about going into next year on a vote-by-vote basis.
Right, but would you be interested, should the Greens be interested in some sort of deal, post-election pact with Labour?
As I said, I think the most important thing is to understand actually what's going to happen. I think some of the rhetoric and some of the stories that are going around at the moment are purely about trying to garner votes as opposed to what people are actually planning to do. Until we really get kind of beneath the skin of what's actually being said, that's when we ought to be talking.
What do you mean get beneath the... I mean, we're talking in the realms of a hung parliament. That does look very likely if you look at the polls. So surely, if the Greens think they're going to win more seats than the one they already have, they could make a similar offer to Nigel Farage. Why not be a player?
Well, we want to be a player by having more MPs in government, of course.
And which are the most important issues for those MPs?
Of course, we're coming in on a social and environmental justice agenda, and lots of, filling the news with lots of deals and that kind of thing over the next few months, of course, is what's going to be talked about. We want to get beyond that, get into government and talk about some of the issues. Right,
well, if you did, as I say, if the offer was to get into government, I mean, you say you want to go beyond talking about deals, but actually your leader's been in talks with the SNP and Plaid Cymru already about forming an anti-austerity alliance. So, as I say, what in that anti-austerity alliance would be your most important issue to push forward on any government agenda?
I think it's this mistaken belief in the trickle-down agenda. The gap's been getting wider and wider over the recent Parliament. The reason we're talking to others about anti-austerity is a complete belief in the fact that we've got to work from the bottom up, not from the top down.
Right, I mean, how would you feel about going into government with two nationalist parties that want to split up the country? That's their sort of raison d'etre. But you're obviously talking to them already about anti-austerity. How would you feel going into government with them?
It's about the issues, that's the thing. And what we have to do is understand the issues and what's going to work for the country, then start talking about, on a vote-by-vote basis, what it is that we want to get done when we're there. All
right. Julia Goldsworthy, you've been in coalition, well, the Lib Dems have been in coalition once. Would you be prepared to repeat that experience?
I think the most important thing is that voters get to decide the outcome of the general election. There is a huge amount of uncertainty. A hung parliament could mean a number of different scenarios.
Yeah, but they won't decide what that outcome will be, will they? The votes will fall and the seats... Well, they won't decide who goes into power with each other, will they?
But that is a function of the decisions that voters make at the general election. I mean, the Lib Dems have been very, very clear. We think that it's just as bonkers to have the SNP running a country that they break up as it would be to have UKIP also, running Europe, a country they want to withdraw from. So I think, we're a party that wants to keep this country firmly anchored in the centre ground, and we're very clear about our top priorities, increasing the amount that people can earn before they pay any tax, investing in our young people, and ultimately any action that we take will be led by the views that the public.
So is that the largest party? I mean, just to clarify, the Lib Dems would go into some sort of coalition with the largest party.
The largest party that people have the first opportunity to seek to form a government.
Right, OK. So you would go into the largest party, despite the fact that Tim Farron has said that going into coalition with the Tories has tarnished the party for a generation. Is he right?
I don't think it was an easy decision to go into coalition, but actually it was something that the parliamentary party signed up to, that we had a special conference. So all of our membership was kind of involved in that decision-making process. And I got involved in politics because I actually want to make a difference to people's life. I want to implement the policies that our party develops. And
but Tim Farron was part of that too, and he says it's tarnished the party for a generation, and actually the party as a brand is dead.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, and Tim Farron was a member of the parliamentary party that kind of took that collective decision that the coalition was in the national interest. Let's not forget that our economy was on the brink. We might have looked more like Greece had we not made that decision, and actually it was the right thing to do, and we've implemented policies that have made a difference to the lives of millions of people in this country. So I'm very proud of the difference that we've made.
Right, so but he's wrong, Tim Farron. I mean, you agree with Paddy Ashdown that actually his judgment was wrong on this?
I think it's been challenging for the party. I think we went into that situation with our eyes open, and I think the most important thing for me is actually making the difference to those millions of people, the difference that our policies
I get your point about the policies. What has it done to the party, though, Julia Goldsworthy? I mean, it's not just Tim Farron that said it. The Liberal Democrat MP Stephen Lloyd has said, yes, it's played a pivotal role, the coalition, in stopping the Tories from being completely demented, as he puts it, but we killed ourselves in the process.
I don't think we killed ourselves in the process. I think it was challenging, but actually...
Has it been good for the party being in coalition?
I think that I've got a record that I'm more than happy to campaign on in my constituency. I've got a whole load of people who are joining me in campaigning on that record. So I think it's been difficult for the party, but actually it was the right thing to do, and it's a decision that I stand by, along with many other party members.
Is Clegg toast, as Stephen Lloyd says, whatever happens?
No, I think he's been a great leader. Yeah. He's been kind of pushing forward this agenda in government, and I think he's done a fantastic job.
And he should stay whatever happens, even if you lose 20, 30 seats.
I think it's totally, I think that's a matter for after the election, but I think he's been a fantastic leader, and I really hope he's in a position to continue to be able to do so.
You said the party's committed to talk to the party with the most seats after the election, but if there needs to be a deal, and actually if you do the maths again, even a deal involving two parties is going to be tricky. So would you, as a Liberal Democrat, be prepared to be involved in talks that would perhaps be three parties?
Again, I think that's a function of the outcome of the general election. That's not something that the Liberal Democrats or actually any political party have control of. So any action that any party takes has to be dictated by the actual result. And it may well be the case that we need a more complicated set of arrangements than we've had over the last 5 years. But I think we've been clear that we just can't see ourselves doing a deal that involves UKIP or the SNP for that matter.
Right, OK. Well, that's clear. Yeah. What about on the looser arrangement? Would you have a preference for a looser arrangement, a confidence and supply, rather than a formal coalition?
I think it's difficult to see how that would actually work. I think the Fixed Term Parliament Act actually makes a very, very big difference. I think as well as providing kind of security to the smaller parties, that the larger party won't just cut and run and call an election on a date that suits them the best. I think it also means from the larger party's point of view, if they don't have some kind of formal arrangement, and it may be a formal coalition as we have now, or it could be an agreement for kind of support on certain issues, there isn't a formal arrangement, then actually it's just handing control to the opposition, and it undermines the stability of government.
So you would favour a more formal coalition is, in your mind, more preferable?
I think it would be really difficult to do anything else.
Sarah Sackman, would you do a deal with the Greens?
Look, I think, as others have said, what we want to see is a progressive government. And if people want a Labour government, they should vote Labour. And what we want to do in the next, 50 days, is talk about the issues, talk about the policies that a Labour government would implement. And then we'll see, the voters will decide, and then the outcome will determine whether there's a coalition of some kind or not.
What's your view towards the SNP?
I think what I would say to voters in Scotland who are considering voting SNP...
And there seem to be rather a lot of them considering voting SNP. If the polls are to be believed, you'll be massacred.
I think the point is the election on the 7th of May is different from the referendum. And that question on the referendum was settled in favour of a no vote. The majority in Scotland has spoken on that. But if voters in Scotland who are considering voting SNP want to see a progressive government, then it's a straight choice between David Cameron as Prime Minister, one of the most ideologically right-wing Prime Ministers since Margaret Thatcher, or a Prime Minister in Ed Miliband who is focusing on inequality inequality. And if they want to see that tackled, then they should vote Labour.
But you agree with your senior Labour colleagues that ruling out a deal with the SNP would be counterproductive at this stage?
I think it's pointless to speculate on what is going to happen after the election. The voters have to decide. And what we need to do in the next few weeks is concentrate on putting a positive message to the voters in Scotland, in Wales, in England, about what a Labour government would do.
But, as you said, how difficult it is in Scotland, particularly for Labour MPs who are either trying to hold their seats or win them over as new MPs. It's difficult if Ed Miliband doesn't rule out some sort of deal with the SNP. It makes their job harder.
Well, I think what's important is that we've heard from the SNP themselves that they are ruling out a coalition. So I think
but what they haven't ruled out, well, they haven't actually completely ruled out, but they have said that they would prefer a looser arrangement. Should Ed Miliband rule out any sort of pact with the SNP?
Again, I think it's preemptive to predetermine what the voters are going to do. And I think one of the things that's interesting, because a lot of this discussion has come out of this Tory poster that we've seen with Alex Salmond with Ed Miliband in his pocket. And it's interesting that the Tories in this country have nothing positive to say to voters in Scotland whatsoever. And one thing I'm pretty sure of is whether you're a voter in Scotland thinking of voting SNP or voting Labour, the one thing we can both agree on is we don't want a Tory government.
Well, do you want to answer that? You've got nothing positive to say in Scotland at all.
We've got a great record that we can...
In Scotland?
We've got a great record that, I talk to about my constituents here and in the marginal seats that we're trying to secure. But, to tackle poverty and insecurity, and inequality, you need to have a strong economy. Because unless you have a strong economy that's supporting business and generating jobs, you cannot bring in the revenue to support public services. And I think we mustn't forget that. And what's interesting is at the weekend, Ed Balls would not say whether he would or would not go into coalition with the SNP. So the options are pretty clear at the next election. In 50-odd days' time, people can vote for David Cameron to return to Downing Street and continue on our record. Or you have an option of sort of chaos, returning...
Yes, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say, yeah.
Or the option is either chaos with, Miliband being at number 10, and they have not learnt their lesson on what they did before. Will you rule
out, as the ladies have put you, will you rule out, and why shouldn't David Cameron rule out a deal with UKIP?
Look, I'm just a candidate. I don't think it's my job to rule deals out.
You're selling the party's message on the doorstep.
The message on the doorstep is pretty clear. If you want a majority Conservative government to continue working and delivering our economy that has improved schools. We've got 1 million more kids now going to good and outstanding schools. We've got 1,000 new doctors and nurses on the doorstep.
We've heard your thing, but we're asking specifically at this point, Nuz, about deals and coalitions and what people are saying on the doorstep. The problem for you is you're going to be asked on the doorstep about what a Labour government might do, whether they are the largest party or form a minority administration, and that's a problem if you cannot answer straightly what you do about the SNP.
I mean, I think anybody who is predicting a possible coalition of whatever shade knows that going into the election, what you want to do is to have the most seats possible.
Of course, and everyone knows that.
And that's what we're campaigning on. We have to campaign on our positive offer for the country, tackling inequality, more house building, protecting the NHS,
all right.
all the positive policies.
I didn't let Nuz go on with her party manifesto, and I'm not going to let you do the same. So we'll leave it there. We'll continue this chat through the programme. Now, the one party that seems keenest to talk about the prospect of a hung parliament is the SNP. And no wonder, with some polls predicting they could win between 40 and 50 seats in May. They could easily hold the balance of power after polling day. Well, Nicola Sturgeon, Scottish First Minister and SNP leader, has been speaking in London this morning and said that her party will be a constructive force at Westminster should that happen. She told the LSE, "We won't just serve Scotland's interests, although we will most certainly do that, but we will seek to do more than that if we get the opportunity. We will also seek to play our part in bringing about positive, long-lasting and progressive change right across the UK." Well, we're joined now by Deputy SNP Leader in our Dundee studio, Stuart Hosey. Welcome to the Daily Politics, Stuart Hosey. Right, we just heard there, Nicola Sturgeon, that the SNP wants to bring positive change across the UK, but your party's sole purpose, raison d'etre, is to break up the United Kingdom. Why would anyone believe that you actually care about what happens to the rest of the UK?
Because we're not independent, and this election is not about independence. In Scottish terms, it's about holding Westminster to account and making sure the next UK government, of whatever persuasion, actually delivers to the promises made during the referendum. But in terms of progressive change throughout the UK, we want to see an end to austerity, very popular in England. We want to keep the NHS public, very popular in England. We don't think the UK should be spending £100 billion we don't have on Trident and its replacement. They're very popular outside Scotland as well, so there are a whole range of progressive policies which are on the table. We've been very open and upfront about that, and that's what Nicola was talking about.
Yes, but Stuart Hosey, you say that this is not the referendum campaign. You're absolutely right. It's not necessarily about independence, but that's what everybody associates the SNP with, about an independent Scotland that the SNP would like to run. So, as I say again, why would anyone believe what you've just said?
Because I'm telling the truth. This election is not about independence. This is not a rerun of the referendum. It isn't. It can't be. We do not want that to be a rerun of the referendum. This is about holding Westminster's feet to the fire in Scottish terms to make sure they deliver on the promises they made. And remember, the Scottish public think that's maximum devolution, everything except defence and foreign affairs. But on top of that, it's delivering progressive policies across the UK, particularly an end to austerity.
Right, but I mean, Nicola Sturgeon has said that the SNP MPs may vote now on English health matters, for example, which would break their self-denying ordinance that's been there in the past. I mean, why would you do that? I mean, it will look surely vastly hypocritical of the SNP to break that promise that they've certainly held electorally and start to vote on issues that are purely devolved to Scotland, like health.
Well, Nicola made the point very clearly. It's where there's an impact on Scotland. Let me give you an example. If the NHS in England was privatised, as the Tories want, and they introduced charging in order to cut the funding, there would be an immediate cut to the baseline funding in Scotland. So, of course, the people of Scotland would expect us to protect funding for the Scottish Health Service. But in the meantime, I think the people in the rest of the UK would be delighted that the SNP voted to keep the NHS in public hands. So it's win-win in Scotland and across the UK.
Can you rule out the SNP MPs voting on other issues that are completely devolved, like education?
Oh, well, if they're completely devolved, utterly devolved...
Yes. Well, health is utterly devolved. I mean, most people's minds, health is utterly devolved too, Stuart Hosey. So, all right, you've explained that on health. Just can you rule it out on education?
Well, it would be the same story. If it was a kind of operational thing, there'd be no reason for us to take an interest whatsoever. However, if it was the introduction, say, of some kind of free school or foundation school that again led to a cut in education funding, quite likely under the Tories, then that also would have an immediate consequential effect.
So you're going to use that, though, aren't you? You're going to use that to justify, just to make it clear, you're going to use that to justify that you could actually vote on matters that really only affect England. You'll do it with education, you could do it with policing, you could do it with justice, you could do it with housing. Never mind that these issues are totally devolved. As I say, it will look, it may not be, but it will look hypocritical.
Well, it isn't hypocritical if it's explained properly. If there is a change to English funding on any of these devolved matters, which has an impact in Scotland, then the Scottish public would expect us to defend the Scottish interest. And as I say, if it's keeping education public, health public, keeping cops on the beat in England as well as in Scotland, I suspect that would be very, very popular, particularly with Labour voters down south.
Well, let's talk about Labour. Would you go into coalition with Labour if they're the largest party?
Oh, well, we've laid out a range of options, a vote-by-vote basis, a confidence and supply arrangement.
But I just want to clarify,
including on this programme.
Yes, I just want to clarify. No, I understand that, but for our viewers, would you go into a formal coalition with Labour?
Well, what we've said is we think that's the least likely outcome. I don't think it would be in our instincts. I don't think Labour would have that instinct either. But some kind of arrangement that stopped the Tories being in government, I think would be extremely popular indeed. Right, OK, so you talk about a supply and confidence deal with Labour. In fact, Alex Salmond said that was likely and maybe on a vote-by-vote basis probable. Is getting rid of Trident a red line in any post-election negotiation? We simply can't support or countenance spending £100 billion on Trident and its replacement. Right, well, and if it was a confidence and supply arrangement, we'd clearly have to agree on some things, and one of those would be our opposition to spending that money on Trident replacement. We've made that extremely clear indeed. Right, but Labour is committed to continuing the at-sea deterrent. So, in fact, right here and now, it doesn't look likely, does it, to have any sort of post-election deal with Labour? Well, as it stands right now, this is what Labour will say before the election, but as you and I both know, substantial majority of Labour candidates actually back the SNP on not replacing Trident.
Hang on, it wasn't a substantial majority. It wasn't a substantial majority of candidates. It was a substantial majority of the number who actually took part in that particular survey, which is not a substantial majority of those candidates overall. And as I say to you, I have not found any senior Labour politician who actually before, or no doubt after the election, is going to get rid of that commitment to continue an at-sea deterrent.
Well, Joe, I look around Scotland where the majority of Scotland's elected representatives are against Trident. That may have been a small sample, Joe, but the majority of those polled said they were opposed to replacing Trident. It might well be there is a majority to end this obscenity and save £100 billion in the process.
But you wouldn't move on that at all.
The early hours of the 8th of May.
Yeah, you would rule out any sort of watering down of your commitment to get rid of Trident.
Well, we've made clear the things we want to see in return for help, if that's where we end up on the 8th of May, is an end to austerity, more powers for Scotland, and the inability to spend £100 billion on Trident and its replacement. That's extremely clear, it's open, it's honest, it's transparent, and it's upfront with the public.
Could you do any deal with the Tories? I know you've ruled out a coalition, but could you do any deal on a vote-by-vote basis with the Tories if they were the largest party to get some of the things you want?
No, we simply couldn't do a deal with the Tories. I mean,
None at all.
The memory of deindustrialisation, of Thatcher, of the poll tax in Scotland is very, very raw. And even this current bunch, Cameron and Osborne, we're seeing the effects of austerity. And of course, the threat of more austerity to come, 30 billion of extra cuts voted for by Labour and the Lib Dems, by the way, on the 13th of January. It makes that beyond the pale.
Who would lead the Westminster negotiations for you, Stuart Hosey, if there is a hung parliament?
Nicola Sturgeon, the party leader, would lead the negotiations. She's made that very clear, and I think that's the right thing to do.
And has Alex Salmond ruled himself out of being leader of the SNP at Westminster if he wins his seat?
Angus Robertson, the MP for Murray, is leader of the Westminster group.
Yes.
I am the deputy leader of the party. We have a perfectly good leadership structure in place. I think the last thing the former First Minister would want would be to lead that group. However, I think every other party would give their eye teeth to have such a big beast at Westminster.
Right. But he hasn't ruled himself out, though, has he?
I think you'll have to ask him, but I suspect the last thing the ex-First Minister would want to do would be to lead the Westminster group.
Oh, well, let's see what happens after the election then. Stuart Hosey, thank you. George Osborne's final budget of this Parliament on Wednesday will dominate this week. But as you'd expect, with an election looming, there are plenty of other things going on to keep Westminster's journalists busy. In a moment, we'll speak to two of them. There they are, on College Green, shivering probably outside Parliament. But first, let's take a look at some of the main events coming up. Tomorrow, Nigel Farage's book, The Purple Revolution, is released. It will detail the untold story of the journey UKIP has travelled under his leadership. Also, tomorrow evening, the Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, Green Party leader Natalie Bennett and Plaid Cymru leader Leanne Wood will take part in a debate on BBC Three. On Wednesday, George Osborne delivers the final budget of this Parliament. It has been reported that the Chancellor's speech will highlight both measures agreed by the coalition and Conservative tax proposals. On Thursday, the Prime Minister will attend a European Council meeting in Brussels, where he will discuss energy policy and the situation in Ukraine with other heads of state. Spring conference season is still upon us, and the week ends with the Scottish Lib Dem conference taking place in Aberdeen. Well, we're joined now by Vincent Moss from the Sunday Mirror and Laura Patel from The Times. Welcome to both of you. So, Laura Patel, what are the headlines for the budget? Because quite a lot of it's been sort of leaked out over the last few days.
Yeah, we've had bits and bobs, like an announcement today about an overhaul of business rates for small businesses. But I think the most important stuff is going to be the things that makes a difference to what people can feel in their pockets. It's interesting because a budget this close to the election normally doesn't have that much significance. It's just a sort of bit of political frippery. But with the election, with the polls being so close, this could make a difference. And I think the most significant thing that's going to change is that there's an increase in the personal allowance coming in April. So just 1 month before the budget, people are actually going to have more tangible cash in their bank accounts.
Right, and how is Labour going to deal with that, Vincent Moss? Because, I mean, this is the sort of launchpad, if you like, for the election campaign. I mean, I know it feels like it's been going on for months, but this can only be of use, surely, to the Tories and the coalition.
Yes, I think that George Osborne will be trying to, if you like, trick Labour into backing some of his elements of his budget, and they'll be under pressure to do that. I think the Labour strategy will be to say, where's this money coming from? There will be tax cuts, possibly on things like beer duty and raising the personal allowance. There'll also be benefit cuts. And I think it'll be a question of scrutinising from Labour's point of view that budget and seeing if the sums add up, because the suggestion is that very much at the moment the sums don't add up.
How do you think, though, Vince Moss, the cost of living agenda that Labour has been promoting over the last 18 months or so, how is that going to hold up?
Well, it's very difficult because that is their key trump card, if you like, that and campaigning on the risk that the Conservatives propose to the NHS. But I think you'll see cuts on things like potentially beer duty, and as Laura says, the raising of the income tax threshold will be very welcome for many, many people, especially those on lower wages. But I mean, they will have to just make the cost of living issue work and keep pressing on things like energy prices. We're already starting to see petrol prices in some areas starting to creep back up. So I think you'll see Labour making a big play of that.
How big a constraint, Laura, have the Liberal Democrats been on this budget for George Osborne?
Well, the Tories are enjoying saying that they have been a constraint. I mean, for example, we know that the Tories are keen to do something on inheritance tax, raising the threshold before you have to pay on inheriting an estate. The budget itself had to be agreed between the two parties, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Osborne floating some of the manifesto promises in his speech and in some of the briefing around it afterwards, so he might be able to sort of have it both ways, as it were.
What about the idea of it being a tax or a giveaway in any shape, sense or form? Is that actually likely to happen, or will it be steady as she goes?
I mean, George Osborne said yesterday in an interview, pre-budget interview, that there were going to be no gimmicks, no giveaways, but you know, we've all got to know Osborne for the last 5 years, and he's a deeply, deeply political man, and I'm sure there'll be something in there. It's his last big chance to do something before the election, and I would be surprised if there wasn't something. It might not be a huge giveaway, it might be a promise of something to come in the manifesto.
Yeah, do you agree with that, Vincent? It seems amazing, really, to think that he couldn't pull something out when we're just sort of weeks away from the election. But on the other hand, is he thinking about his reputation and legacy after the election?
Well, yes, very much so, and I'm sure there will be something. I mean, there's a story a day. Today it was business tax changes, and the day before it was pensions. It'll be something else tomorrow, and it'll be something on the day of the budget, and then, of course, they'll want to pull a rabbit out of the hat. And I think, as Laura says, inheritance tax, first promise, of course, in 2007. We've been waiting for that one a long time. Something like that he might try and promise on. But I think the question that people will look at, it will be one for the Institute of Fiscal Studies to look at as well, is do the numbers add up? And I suspect the other thing he'll be looking to do is, as you say, secure his legacy. It could be his last budget as Chancellor. Even if the Conservatives win, he could be ripe for a move, maybe perhaps the Foreign Secretary.
All right. Well, no doubt they'll be talking about beer and cuts in duty, so we'll cheers, obviously, to that. Thank you both very much. In less than 2 weeks' time, the curtain will come down on a number of political careers when Parliament is dissolved ahead of the election. There are at least 86 MPs who know they are leaving Parliament because they've chosen to retire. They include 17 former cabinet ministers, 36 Tories and 37 Labour MPs. Ellie has been to meet a couple of them.
It was the year the stock markets crashed. They started building the Channel Tunnel, and Margaret Thatcher fought a general election for the third time and won. In Bristol South, the Labour candidate Dawn Primarolo became an MP. She now says 1987 feels like a long time ago.
When I came in, my son was 8. My first grandson is now 8. That's the whole generation. I just think I need to move on, get my life back, give somebody else a chance. I just feel it's the right time. Don't push too far, your dreams are China in your hand.
When she started out as a backbench MP, the goings-on in the Commons still weren't televised, but the cameras have since filmed her in her role as a minister and Deputy Speaker.
Being a minister is fantastic. I think I'd probably opt for that. There's nothing like being involved in a government that's making changes which you believe are for the best, drawing on your constituents' experiences to make it relevant to them. That was fantastic, being a minister. Being Deputy Speaker's been fine. Very interesting watching my colleagues. I've learnt a lot, and I've learnt a lot I'd rather not have learnt.
As Olympics Minister, Hugh Robertson was part of something the rest of us can only dream of. He did loads of photo calls with David Beckham.
As a country, we really delivered. If you look at all the various legacies that have come out of 2012, I think by far the strongest is that it's recalibrated the way the rest of the world look at us.
But while the 2012 Games provided a legacy for the country, he says his lasting contribution from a 14-year parliamentary career is something a bit different.
It was probably the decision I took in 2005 to back David Cameron for the leadership of the Conservative Party. There were very, very few of us who were doing it at this stage. He and I arrived together in 2001. We had offices next door to each other. I think at a very early stage I thought he had it in him to lead the Conservative Party and the country. I'm personally a great believer in what he has done as Prime Minister.
So as you survey your kingdom here, what were you with?
Even the idyllic setting of his Kent constituency won't sway him. In his early 50s, Hugh Robertson says it's time to move on.
For some people, becoming one of the sort of greybeards of Parliament is one of the things they want to do. For me, that wasn't an avenue that held so many attractions. I really wanted to come in and make whatever contribution I could. I probably feel I've done that, and as I say, I now want to get out before people get fed up with me.
In less than 2 weeks, a number of political careers will end. It's enough to make anyone a bit nostalgic.
If you hear that police have found somebody wandering lonely around the House of Commons, looking at the empty rooms, it will probably be me.
One day like this a year, it's seen it right.
So that was the view of some MPs who've chosen to stand down at the election. But of course, many more members of Parliament will be leaving Westminster, not because they chose to, but because the voters decided they wanted them to go. And that can be a tough experience. So much so that, according to yesterday's Sunday Times, politicians who lose their seats will be offered counselling by the House of Commons to help them return to ordinary life. Well, I'm not sure he could be described as having returned to an ordinary life, but we're joined by the former Conservative MP, Michael Brown. He lost his seat in 1997, and Julia Goldsworthy, our guest here for the Liberal Democrats, lost her seat in 2010, but hopes, of course, to return this May. Michael Brown, well, first of all, let's get your reaction to counselling be offered. Do you think that's a good idea?
Yes, I think it probably is. When I left the House of Commons after my voters had decided to sack me, I was on my own, and I think I got, in those days, you got 6 months redundancy, and you were sent into the graveyard. Basically, I must have felt what it's like to die. I mean, I was reading my political obituary, Joe, and I think if any medic had counselled me and they'd have asked me how did I feel, I would say I feel as though I'm dead, because I'm going around clanking my chains from the political grave every time I go to the supermarket, and every time anybody sees me in my constituency, my former constituency, they think I'm dead.
I mean, very dramatic it sounds too, but I take your point from the political point of view about feeling dead as if that's it, that's the end, certainly for the foreseeable future. I mean, do you think about losing beforehand in the sense of planning what you're going to do if you don't keep your seat or win your seat?
Well, I certainly knew that I was going to lose my seat, Joe, because from 1994 onwards, 3 years before the general election, the Tories were losing every single by-election. 20,000 majorities just fell. Every single councillor at every May elections, European elections. So I had fair warning. And what I basically did was to make sure that I got my bank account in order. I took out a life insurance 10-year policy in 1987, and it matured in 1997, the year I lost. And for an £18,000 investment, I walked out with £30,000 plus my £20,000 redundancy. So I had £50,000 to cushion me.
Right.
And basically, I was on my own, and I had to go into the real world and find a proper job.
Because that was a bit of good financial planning on your part and financial advice for any other MPs who find themselves in your situation. But what did you do work-wise? As you say, you sort of expected it. So what did you plan to do?
I had no plans whatsoever. I wrote an article about what we're talking about now, and I sent it in to my dear friend Colin Brown, who was then the deputy political editor of The Independent. It was printed the following week, and the week after that I was asked to go into the House of Commons, sit in the public gallery and write sketches for The Independent. The rest, as they say, for the last 18 years has been history.
And prove the point, here you are on the Daily Politics some years later, it's true. I mean, had you been institutionalised in politics, do you think? Because you'd been a researcher before becoming an MP, and you were an MP for nearly 50 years. No, you hadn't done a real real... So were you institutionalised?
I think I was, and I think that's the worst thing for those of us that have retirement thrust upon us by an ungrateful electorate. I was there for 18 years. By the way, Joe, the shock actually for me wasn't losing, because I knew I was going to lose. The shock was winning in 1979 as a 27-year-old wet behind the ears kid who didn't have a clue what day of the week it was, and who, as you said, I'd never done a proper job. I've been a bank clerk in Barclays Bank. And worked in politics ever since then until I was 45 and relieved of my responsibilities. And I had been thoroughly institutionalised. And you need to realise that there is no chief whip to tell you what to do in the evening. You have to make your own entertainment. You've got to cook your own dinner.
God, it's tough, isn't it? It really is hard work afterwards. I mean, Julia Goldsworthy, you lost your seat. Does any of that resonate with you? I mean, here you are trying again, but does any of that resonate with you?
Some of it does. I mean, in marginal seats, so I won my seat from 3rd place in 2005, so nobody was expecting...
To win
first time around, and I lost by a very narrow margin in 2010 by 66 votes. And you know, I think I knew it was going to be close, so there's no time to think about alternative options. You're just thinking about getting to election day. And of course, it's not just the MP; it's the whole team. You know, hundreds of people who've given up a huge amount of time to support you. So I think it is kind of difficult for the whole local party organisation.
But it didn't put you off, because here you are again.
No, but the things that motivate me in politics are still there, you know, and my job as a candidate is still to try and achieve those things.
What advice, Michael Brown, would you have for our guests here, perhaps Julia aside, since she's had some experience of this already, if they don't win?
Well, I think that if the candidate for Wealden doesn't win, the Conservative Party's in real trouble. And I think she should have the good fortune to be able to choose the time of her retirement, unlike me.
That's very subtly put there, Michael.
For those that think they might have a chance and do make it, always look at the person you've just defeated and say to yourself, one day that's going to happen to me.
Any of you put off hearing any of this? Nuz?
No, I just want to say I'm not taking any vote for granted.
Of course you have. You've got to say that.
Well,
hang on, you fought and lost. Is that true in 2010?
I fought in Birmingham Ladywood. It was a tough Labour stronghold. And I think it's important that one of the things that was mentioned is that people have a career before they enter politics. And I used to work for 2 charities, Age UK and Breakthrough Breast Cancer.
So you did have life before?
I did have life, but not only life. I know what it's like on the outside, knocking on the door of Westminster, trying to change policy, secure funding for healthcare, which is why it's important that we have people with a career outside of politics come into politics so they know how to champion the most vulnerable in our community.
But what did it feel like watching new MPs establishing themselves in Westminster in 2010? How did it make you feel? More determined to win a seat in future or deflated?
I mean, it was great to see so many of the MPs that I worked with, and I support. Mary McLeod is the one that comes to mind, and she was selected at the last election, and it was great to see what they were able to achieve. But, you know, we've got another election to win in 50 days' time.
Darren, what about you? More difficult. You know, the Greens have got 1 MP. You're obviously hoping to be another MP, if Caroline Lucas holds that seat, of course. But are these the sort of things that are going through your mind at the moment when you listen to Michael Brown? What you might do if it doesn't happen?
No, not at all. It's more about what might happen if it does happen. So, you know, it is Bristol West is our number 2 target seat. We've got a great chance. And, I mean, I'm very new into politics. A year ago, I was helping Bristol win the European Green Capital Award, and then found myself going into politics almost a week later. And it's incredibly exciting. The worry is that the process of government, and I think it's really important, not least of all talking about what you're going to do afterwards. It's about people treating politics like it's their main job, and I think that's certainly something that I'm thinking about.
Right, would be your main job if you win, won't it, Sarah?
Absolutely. I mean, my career as a barrister, I think in some ways is something that I would hope to carry on with if I'm not successful, but it's a very close race in Finchley, and it's the area I grew up in. So it's a community that I'm dedicated to anyway, so the sorts of things we're doing in our grassroots campaigning is stuff that I would, you know, maintain an interest in and work for my community regardless of whether I'm elected or not.
What about Michael Brown? I mean, even if you expected to lose your seat, as you did and many other Conservatives, it must take time to adapt to life outside, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, it took me a year. It wasn't helped either by the fact that on the day that I lost, along with about 160 other Tory colleagues, including people like Michael Portillo, one newspaper did a list of the most unemployable ex-Tory MPs. I think I was bottom, and they said he wouldn't be even capable of selling the big issue outside Sainsbury's. That is true. That's not easy. That requires skill. But on the other hand, that was the spur, because everybody thought, well, Michael Brown, he'll never pick himself up off the floor. But having found my 11 plus 40 or 50 years ago, I am very good at picking myself up off the floor. And I think MPs need to use all that resilience that they've gained in the House of Commons from being insulted by their voters and just put it to good use if they become an ex-MP.
You're really selling it here. You are living proof, though, that it is possible. I mean, Sarah, you said you're a barrister. What about the issue of second jobs and being able to carry on, let's say, your professional job? That's difficult for someone like you. Wouldn't you want to carry that on if you become an MP, keep your hand in?
I mean, I think Ed Miliband has taken a really good stance on this, which is that MPs shouldn't have second jobs. Because I think today, being a constituency MP is a full-time job, and that's the expectation that the people who put their trust in you have of you, and certainly that's my intention. If I'm elected on the 7th of May, I'm going to be a full-time MP for Finchley and Golders Green. That said, I think it's relevant and beneficial that I've had a career outside of politics and the experience and expertise that I would bring to the role.
Do you agree with that? Or shouldn't people who have professional expertise keep that expertise and be allowed to carry it on?
I think it's much more than that. I think what we're seeing is a symptom of the fact that people have partly seen this as a way of building a career outside of politics, that it's a way, there's a lot of money floating around the system, and money buys you a way into politics in a way that it shouldn't be true. And I absolutely agree that this should be a primary focus on the day job. It is incredibly useful for me to have had a career. I was in the Air Force, I was in the civil service.
What's that brought to politics for you?
Experience, understanding, working with people who are suffering with drug treatment problems. It inevitably brings you with an ability to cope with what the implications are for policy. So I think it's incredibly helpful. I wouldn't be able to do it otherwise.
All right, Michael Brown, thank you. Good to see you again. If you're a regular viewer of the Daily Politics, you'll have noticed that we've been playing a series of short films showing highlights from our coverage of the main political parties. In honour of Nicola Sturgeon's visit to London today, it's the SNP's turn. Take a look at this.
You're feared, you're frightened because you think you would lose if you had the referendum now.
No, I think we'll win the referendum.
The pound or the euro?
The pound.
You never said that a few years ago.
Will you now on the programme condemn the cybernats?
I condemn everybody and anybody who uses intemperate language.
Welcome to this special edition of the Daily Politics, live from Edinburgh, where as you can see the weather is glorious. David Cameron or Ed Miliband?
Ed Miliband is slightly better looking.
Who will they ask next? Kermit the Frog?
This is a place where they used to not bother to count the votes, they just weighed them. Going to be clear cut, or is it going to go down to the wire? I think it's going to be very close.
Well, there we go on a screen 3 stories high. Scotland has said no.
So tremble, false whigs, in the midst of your glee. You've not seen the last of my bonnets and me.
Well, that's very interesting. Borgen or the bridge?
Borgen.
Why would you be a big fan of a show about a woman leading a left-wing government of a small, successful European state?
And all the films we've made are published on Twitter, and we're using them for a very unscientific online popularity contest, just to make that clear. We're counting the number of times they've been retweeted, and at some point we may even reveal a winner. We'll probably forget, actually. Now, how often have you heard phrases like vote SNP, get the Conservatives, or go to bed with Nigel Farage, wake up with Ed Miliband? As we apparently wave goodbye to the old days of single-party government, all the parties are making this kind of appeal for tactical voting. But does it work? And is anyone listening? Giles has been out baffling commuters on their way to work.
They're talking about deals that are struck sort of after the election was made and how they're going to form a new government, because essentially nobody's going to get a majority and we're going to end up with a kind of hybrid mix between parties. So, that basically they're using that as a threat against voters to say, look, if you don't vote conclusively for one side, you're not going to get anything. You're going to get a mix.
No, I think it's just to confuse people so they don't know what's going on and they don't think about changing their minds. They just vote for whoever they've always voted for.
Very confusing at the moment, yeah. They're all trying different tactics, all new tactics, to be honest. We haven't seen before, so it's very, nobody's set their stall out yet for what they want to do.
So you'll vote?
Oh yes, I will vote.
But you won't be scared off by, you know, if you do that, you'll get that.
No, not really.
Definitely not.
I'll vote for the party that I'm interested in.
So I would vote tactically. I'm traditionally a Labour voter, but I would be wary of a coalition with the SNP and the Labour Party. So I would look at tactically voting, which would be best for the whole country.
So that's what the public makes of the party's rather confusing messages. And as our candidates in the studio are expected to sell those messages to the voters, we've decided to help them out with a little test. They'll be delighted to hear. So we could call this the coalition quiz, everybody. Nuz, first of all.
Yes.
Who said if you vote for UKIP, you get... sorry, let me try that again. If I can't read the question. If you vote for UKIP, who do you get, according to the Tories?
Well, you get Labour.
Right, well, let's have a little listen and a look at this and see if she's right.
On the 7th of May, you could go to bed with Nigel Farage and wake up with Ed Miliband. I don't know about you, but not one bit of that works for me.
That was one question correct for you, Nuz, although it was specifically, of course, Ed Miliband. Sarah, if you vote UKIP, who do you get according to Labour?
Get Tory.
David Cameron. Rachel Reeves' tweet last night, so here we have it. Vote UKIP, get Tory. 1 to you. Darren, if you vote Green, who do you get according to Labour?
Hopefully Green.
No, that wasn't the answer. The Tories, apparently. Peter Hain. Labour said Labour supporters need to vote Labour or they will get 5 more years of austerity. Sarah, another one for you. If you vote for the SNP, who do you get according to Labour?
You get Tory.
Right, well done. You're playing along very well. Let's have a little listen to this.
Every vote cast for another party, including the SNP, makes that prospect of a Tory government more likely.
It's getting easier for you because the answer's the same, I get the feeling. Nuz, if you vote Conservative, who do you get according to Labour?
If you vote Conservative, you'll get a Conservative government.
But what was said based on a Labour election poster, if you vote Conservative, who do you get according to Labour? The clue in Scotland. Let's make it easy.
You know, obviously there's a fault in that poster. If you want a majority Conservative government, you vote Conservative.
You've got to play the game. They said the SNP. Julia, if you vote SNP, who do you get according to the Conservatives?
Labour.
Yes, well done. And all of you, if you vote Lib Dem, who do you get according to Nick Clegg? Perhaps I should give that to you too. You do get Lib Dem. Let's have a little listen to this.
If you're thinking of voting Conservative but are worried that they won't be fair, don't do it. If you're thinking of voting Labour but are worried they will ruin the economy, don't do it. If you think a vote for UKIP or the Greens or the SNP is harmless, it isn't. If you want a stable government that won't lurch to the extremes of left or right, you have to vote for it.
Right, well, that was the only really straightforward answer. I mean, do you think it is confusing, isn't it, Julia, for voters? And we heard there at the end of that film that people will vote tactically, thinking about the whole country, not just about their seat.
So I think you've got 2 different things happening at the same time. So because we have a first-past-the-post system, it basically means that people are thinking about who the winner is in their own seat, as well as what's going on nationally. So in my area, it's been changed hands a lot of times. It's a very close-run thing between myself and the Conservatives. Labour are 9,000 votes behind. So quite a lot of what I get on the doorstep is, I know it was really close last time, and I really want to keep the Tories out locally. But nationally, I think basically just voters are sophisticated. They do know what's going on, and it's up to them to make their calculations about the level of support for their party, an individual, the national picture.
All right. I shouldn't have asked you, should I? Now, because there's just time before we go to find out the answer to our quiz. Darren, I hope you're primed. The question was, what event has got the Green Party into trouble with its activists? So tell us, so I don't have to run through them all. It's not the support rally for Jeremy Clarkson. I'll help you along with that one. So which was it?
I was so hoping we were going to be able to have a conversation about Jeremy Clarkson.
Well, we're not. So what is the right answer?
It's the Green Tie
It
rally.
is, and do you know why?
I don't know, actually.
Right, well, the Green Party of England Wales has cancelled its contract £500 a head. It was going to cost more than the Tories' black and white ball.
Well, our average donation is £20, so that would have been taking us up to a new level of income.
That's it for today. Thanks to all of our guests here, and the 1 o'clock news is starting over on BBC One now. Bye-bye.